Here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. We are here. We are live. It is a Wednesday. It is Thanksgiving Eve, and we got a lot to talk about here on the show. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us as always. Lots to discuss here. Obviously, 3 tremendous football games tomorrow. I think this is probably the best Thanksgiving Day slate that I certainly can remember in my lifetime, and it gets capped off with Joe Burrow's return, which obviously is very, very exciting. We're going to roll through all of those games here on the show. We'll start with our traditional preview. We do it usually our final show on a Friday right before a Sunday Bengals game, but obviously going to do it here on a Wednesday with the Bengals playing on Thursday night. Looking forward to that, obviously, there as well. We got to talk Joe Burrow. We got to talk Jamar Chase. We'll talk the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson. He, too, by the way, has a toe injury, funnily enough, but he was full in practice yesterday, so don't anticipate that being an issue as far as him being available for the Baltimore Ravens. Will it hinder his ability to move around? That, of course, remains to be seen. So we'll preview the Bengals and the Ravens, and also we're going to talk with Mike Petraglia of CLNS Media. The Jungle Roar podcast does a tremendous job on the Bengals beat, so looking forward to having him on the show. We're going to ask him about Joe Burrow, of course, his press conference yesterday. We're going to ask him about Jamar Chase, his apology. We're going to talk about this Ravens game. We're going to talk about Zach Taylor, Trey Hendrickson a little bit, and we got to mention Jermaine Burton there as well, as what a disaster of a draft pick that has been for the Cincinnati Bengals. Jamar Chase was out. This is a guy that's on your roster, right? He's not on your practice squad. Still wasn't able to dress on Sunday against the New England Patriots, so looking forward to having Trags on the show. We're going to talk to him again. That's in about 25 minutes at 10:30. Certainly looking forward to that, and a couple of other things that we need to discuss on the show as well. J.J. McCarthy, I've been very, very hard on J.J. McCarthy, and I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon, to be completely honest with you, so we're going to talk about that. Once again, he's banged up. His status for this weekend up in the air for the Minnesota Vikings. I think it's sometimes in this league you just got to rip the Band-Aid off, right? You got to rip the Band-Aid off and say, you know what, that was a mistake. We're not going to sit here and try to act like it wasn't a mistake and just essentially move on at that point. But we're going to talk about J.J. McCarthy and the Minnesota Vikings a little bit. And another trade in Major League Baseball. It was funny, we were talking about the Simeon and Nimmo trade yesterday, and literally right when we got wrapped up, boom, there was another one. Former Cincinnati Reds, Sonny Gray, he is being dealt to the Boston Red Sox. Red Sox getting 2 arms back, the Cardinals getting 2 arms back in return for Sonny Gray. They're still going to have to pay half of his salary. It's very much a rental situation. The Red Sox are in win-now mode, and they needed a number 2 behind Garrett Crochet, and they go out and get one in Sonny Gray. Mixed thoughts on that. I think, very similar to the Simeon trade and the Nimmo trade. I think you could say, if you're the Cardinals, feels like a win. If you're the Red Sox, feels like you're a win. I have hesitancy paying a guy that much money when, if he throws a fastball, it's getting smacked. But the off-speed stuff still very much good for Sonny Gray, so we'll talk about that a little bit as we wrap up today's show. No show tomorrow. Obviously, it's Thanksgiving, so we're not going to have a show. We will, of course, be live here at the channel for the Bengals game. Craig Sandlin has got you covered there for the in-game stuff, and I'm going to join Craig late night tomorrow night after, hopefully, a Bengals victory. So make sure you check that out. Primetime game, always an opportunity to have a lot of growth here at the channel, and Craig's done a tremendous job all year long. So join Craig for the game, and then I will be joining Craig for a little post-game show live on the channel tomorrow night, Thanksgiving night, after hopefully a Cincinnati Bengals win, and lots of turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, all that good stuff there as well. Reed Mouse is out. He will be back next week. Certainly looking forward to that. Obviously, our show typically the 11 to noon hour here at Chatterbox, but with Reed being out, no off the bench, we've kind of just bumped that up to the 10 o'clock hour here on today's show. Appreciate everyone as always. Make sure you subscribe. We're on our way to 21,000 subs here at the channel. Help us out. Hit that subscribe button. Obviously, hit that thumbs up icon on the stream there if you're watching live on YouTube. We certainly appreciate that. Mike Petraglia in about 23 minutes from now. But let's do our preview. Bengals and Ravens. It's interesting, right? Because I think going into the year, people didn't really expect Pittsburgh to be a team that was a lock to make the playoffs, right? I actually did pick them to go to the playoffs. I picked 3 teams going to the playoffs in the AFC North. Obviously was very wrong when it comes to that. But I think most people would say it was probably a 2-horse race for the division between the Ravens and the Bengals. And that's a lot of Cincinnati people there in that mix that were giving the Bengals a real chance here. I think nationally most people thought, the Ravens are going to to run away with the division, then go on their way to another postseason run, of course, with Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh. And it hasn't really materialized that way. As they got things going, it was kind of clunky. When Lamar was healthy there early in the year, they were scoring a lot of points. But that defense, you watch that defense and you go, that doesn't look like a Baltimore Raven defense. That looks like one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. And let's not pretend that Suggs and Ed Reed and Ray Lewis are still playing. But in recent years, there's still been elements of that Baltimore Ravens style defense. In the beginning of this year, you're looking around like that looks like the Bengals there on defense, like just not good whatsoever. And you had faith, I think, as just a fan of the NFL, that Harbaugh, he's going to figure this thing out. There's a reason why he's been in place so long. There's a reason he's a Super Bowl champion. There's a reason he's getting paid as much money as he is. He knows what he's doing. It's not going to look like this throughout the duration of the year. And sure enough, they've cleaned that up, right? Are they as good as they were in 2000? Absolutely not. But they're a competent defense that can go out there and win football games. And obviously, with the state of this division, good enough to go out there and win this division. And, it's funny. They started off, 1-5 on the season, did the Baltimore Ravens, and people are like, what in the world is going on with Baltimore? Like, they're a complete mess. Like, they're going to miss the playoffs. Harbaugh might be gone. Lamar, what's going on? He's not playing. He's hurt again. And, Vegas basically said, not so fast here. And they had that 1-5 record. And Vegas was like, well, they're still going to go out there and probably win this division. And then you blank, and all of a sudden they've won 5 straight, and they're 6-5. So I get it when you're looking at that from an NFL perspective. You're like, oh, yep, that's what we anticipated. Here come the Baltimore Ravens. But let's not act like this is a Ravens team from a couple of years ago, right? They've had great opportunities past 2-3 years to go win a world championship. They had enough pieces there. They had the quarterback in place. He was healthy enough, right? They had a good defense. They had a running game, right? They made the move for Derrick Henry, great head coach, and they weren't able to capitalize. And, obviously a lot of people have struggled beating Kansas City in the AFC here in recent memory. But you take a look at some of these games. Yeah, they're winning, and they deserve credit for it. But one, they're not beating, teams like the Rams and the Patriots, right? They're definitely beating up on some weaker opponents. And when you see how they operate, they're not like, oh, that's the Baltimore Ravens. It looks very clunky. It looks very unorganized and a little bit dysfunctional, right? And that offensive line, they got some serious issues along the interior of their offensive line. And even with a mobile quarterback like Lamar Jackson, if you give him interior pass rush, that can be something that is very, very difficult to handle. We'll talk about the matchup with the Bengals' run-stopping ability or lack thereof on defense here in a second. But Ravens, they got questions along their offensive line. Lamar, he's back, but he doesn't look like Lamar Jackson out there. Obviously, it's been well documented. Part of the reason why he's one of the best players in the National Football League is he came in, obviously, as a running quarterback, and he has done a tremendous job into developing into a pocket guy, right? Lamar Jackson, past couple of years, very accurate from within the pocket, very accurate throwing the ball down the football field, but that's still not the same player when he doesn't have that ability to escape and go on these long runs. Now, he's still moving around despite the injuries, and he's still coming up with runs, particularly on third down, but he doesn't look like the Lamar Jackson that we're all used to seeing. And it's not like he has aged overnight. That's not the issue here. He clearly is banged up, right? The hamstring, caused him to miss some time. It doesn't look like that is 100%. Doesn't look like he fully trusts it here at this point. And now this toe has popped up as well. Funnily enough, obviously Joe Burrow with the toe injury. Now Lamar's got one there as well. I think his official status as of now, he's listed as questionable, but I don't anticipate him potentially not playing. He was a full participant in practice yesterday, sat out the first day of practice, was a full go yesterday. And if you're a full go on a Tuesday with a Thursday night game, in my opinion, you're going to be just fine to go out there and play. But it's going to be very interesting to watch how well he can move around and if he really needs to move around, right? Because if the Bengals go against the Ravens like they did on the Thursday night game against Pittsburgh, where they just, the pass rush was literally non-existent, he's going to be fine. He's just going to sit back there and, buy a little bit of time and then find somebody down the field, and the Bengals are going to get cooked. But with that issue that the Ravens have along their interior defensive line, that is something certainly you need to monitor very closely here in this football game. The first matchup, you talk about these matchups and keys to victory, what have you. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, are you going to be able to stop the run? The Bengals are giving up over 5 yards per carry, right? And you're going against Derrick Henry. That's not a good situation, right? And the Bengals-Ravens games in recent years have been awesome. Like, just as a football fan, they've been great. Unfortunately for the Bengals, you've kind of ended up on the wrong side of the scoreboard relatively frequently because your defense can't do anything against Lamar. Lamar seemingly always goes off against you. But I feel like this game's going to be a little bit different from a shootout perspective. I don't know necessarily. It wouldn't surprise me, but I wouldn't predict that this is going to be as high-scoring of an affair as some of the previous Bengals-Ravens matchups have been, because I think the Ravens are really going to lean on running the football, especially with Lamar clearly not fully healthy. The receivers for the Ravens, it's not like they got the Bengals receiving core, right? They, Zay Flowers and Bateman and an old DeAndre Hopkins. I expect Mark Andrews to have a big game. Every tight end, of course, seemingly does against the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think they're going to understand that, let's run the football here with Derrick Henry. The Bengals are giving up over 5 yards per carry. Let's try to get him going, right? The Bengals have, of course, struggled in the past with Henry, and he's, of course, one of those guys that you can hit him at, from an initial contact perspective, but he's going to fall forward and get a couple extra yards. And I think if the Ravens really lean on their run, they can chew that clock. It can be a fast football game, and they can keep the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands. And we all, I'm going to ask Trags about this in a little bit, but we're all kind of wondering what we're going to get from Joe Burrow, right? Because if the Bengals get September Joe Burrow, they got no chance to win this game. We all understand that. But if they get Thanksgiving time Joe Burrow, probably going to have a good chance, and I would say probably going to win this football game if that is the case. But my guess here at this point is I think first quarter, it's going to be a feeling out process a little bit for Cincinnati. I'm not sure they're going to score early in this game. And, they're going to probably punt it a few times at the beginning of the game. This is just kind of what my gut tells me. And then the Ravens are going to get the football and run the ball and run it down the field and score. And next thing you know, you're going to blink, and it's already going to be halfway through the second quarter. And you're not going to have much going offensively. You're going to be behind on the scoreboard, and your defense is going to be kind of getting blasted in the run game. That's just kind of what my gut tells me. And then you're going to rely on Burrow kind of waking up a little bit after he gets out on the field the first couple of drives and then coming back in the football game. That's just kind of what my gut says at this point. But that's matchup number one. You want to talk about keys to victory or whatever, you got to slow down Derrick Henry a little bit in this game. If you're going to continue to give up 5 yards per rush, you're in serious, serious trouble. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals. Then the other element of that, of course, is trying to find some level of pass rush. And again, I don't think we're going to see Lamar move as well as he typically does. Now, he's still probably going to move better than anybody you've seen this year, but it's not going to be the typical incredibly elusive Lamar Jackson that's literally impossible to bring down. So you look for somebody along the defensive line to step up. Right, and you've seen Myles Murphy in recent weeks. It's like, well, okay, there maybe is a little bit something there. I think a lot of that is us just kind of being desperate, like just please, like show us something. And he has, right? But let's not sit here and act like he looks like a first-round pick and the Bengals should keep him around in the future. That's not the situation here. Obviously, he's getting a lot of opportunity with Hendrickson out and Shamar Stewart, of course, on IR. Definitely going to ask Trags about the Hendrickson fiasco there as well. But Myles Murphy's a guy that needs to step up here in this game. He absolutely does. Then what are you going to do him from an interior perspective? B.J. Hill and T.J. Slayton, it has not been good this year. Again, said it 5 times, you're giving up over 5 yards per carry. That's not good. But this guard play for the Baltimore Ravens is not good. And it is not good at all. And there's going to be an opportunity to provide some interior pass rush. That's the worst thing in the world for a quarterback. If you're dropping back and you got dudes immediately in your face, it's one thing if you got them coming off the edge and then you can, feel it a little bit and step up and perhaps escape. If they're just running through your offensive guards and running right into your face, that can be very difficult to handle. So I'm looking for B.J. Hill and T.J. Slayton. They've struggled a lot. They've been better these past 2 weeks. They need to play well for Cincinnati in this game. And then also you got to build off the tackling, right? It's very unfortunate that, look, the defense has been downright horrendous when you look at big picture this year. We all understand that. It doesn't take a genius to point that out. But at the same time, you have to say, well, the past 2 weeks, the past 2 games against Pittsburgh, and, of course, last week against New England, it was good enough to win football games, right? If the defense played like they did against New England and against Pittsburgh throughout the entirety of this year, and the Bengals still had this record, we would be having a totally different conversation. Then I probably, honestly, would be going at Zach Taylor saying, how are you losing these games? Your defense is playing fine. We've talked about this all off season. We talked about it all throughout the beginning of the season. The way this roster is organized, the way that you have structured your pay and the resources that you've allocated to your top-end players that play offense, it's not ever going to be an elite defense. You can win with a top 15 defense, maybe even top 20. I don't know. If you're a top 10 defense, boom, you're really a Super Bowl contender. And, I think the Bengals, the way they played this past 2 weeks, top 20 defense. That should be enough to get you some wins, and obviously it wasn't the past 2 weeks. But from a tackling perspective, you have to build off that. It's funny, I got a notification on my phone yesterday about voting for Barrett Carter for Defensive Rookie of the Week. It kind of made me laugh out loud a little bit, but, fair play to him. He had a lot of tackles in the game against New England, and that certainly was his best game. He made some mistakes, obviously, there in the game as well, but it was refreshing, I guess, to see him actually get guys on the ground. And the Bengals are going to have to do that again against Baltimore to have a chance, right? I mean, this Ravens team, I just talked about how they're not as good as they have been in recent years. If you miss tackles and, shoot yourself in the foot like that, you're not going to have a chance. So it'll be interesting to see how Barrett Carter and Geno Stone respond in this game for the Cincinnati Bengals, because say what you want about those two guys, we've ripped them apart all year. They played fine, and you could even say they played well on Sunday against New England. Geno Stone, of course, had his best play of the year with the pick six, kind of right place, right time thing. But, hey, he made a play, he capitalized, and it was 6 points for the Cincinnati Bengals. So how is he going to respond to that? Remember, this is his former team there as well. Is he going to show some more physicality? Is he going to be able to get guys down? Is he going to be able to make some plays in the back end? Right? I anticipate Lamar taking some shots in this game, especially if they find themselves in short yard. I feel like they're gonna find themselves in like 2nd and 1 a lot, or 2nd and 2 after a big run on first down. That's gonna open up some opportunities for them to take some shots down the field, and we'll see how the Cincinnati Bengals DBs are able to play when it comes to that. I think Jalen Davis certainly provided a spark last week. Would like to see more of him in this game. He was at that nickel spot for him. It's funny because, I don't think many people were banging the table for Mike Hilton to come back. Obviously, it was very clear last year he couldn't run with the receivers anymore. He was getting taken off the field on 3rd down. He clearly was not a fan of that whatsoever, and it was probably the right move to move off him. But you could use a Mike Hilton from a couple of years ago. That certainly would help. You could use a Jesse Bates, obviously, there as well. So I think you got a bit of a spark there at that nickel spot, which was good to see from Jalen Davis. Just a grinder, right? It's a guy that's been around this team, this organization for a long time, practice squad guy, just shows up, plays well in the preseason. When he gets called up, he's a very serviceable player, and that provided their defense a little bit of juice there. So that was refreshing to see. Would like to see him get some more playing time as well on Thursday against the Baltimore Ravens. And then, of course, obviously, you got to talk about the offense, right? What are my expectations for the defense? There's a part of me that thinks they're going to hold Baltimore under 30, which some people laugh at that and say, well, oh, yeah, we're a big deal there. But, this Bengals defense gets blown up by the Ravens. So I do have some optimism, I think cautious optimism, that they can hold this Ravens offense to under 30, but definitely going to be in the high 20s there for Baltimore. And then it's like, okay, how many points can you score as an offense? And we alluded to this earlier in the segment. Gut tells me it's going to take Joe Burrow a second to, feel things out, right? You can take as many practice reps as you want. You can go through the week. You can throw routes on air. You can do 7-on-7. You can do 11-on-11 stuff in practice with your teammates. But until the bullets are out there flying and you got guys in purple trying to take your head off in a hostile environment, it's going to be different. And we'll see. We'll find out very quickly. If Joe Burrow takes a couple snaps and he's not moving whatsoever and he's getting blown up, we're going to all be like, oh boy, this is a serious mistake. But I don't think the Bengals would do that. I don't think Zach Taylor would do that. I don't think Joe Burrow would do that as well. I expect him to be moving around, not like peak Joe Burrow, but he's going to be moving around, protecting himself, operating within the pocket, eyes down the field, and he's got his boy out there, Jamar, right? So that's obviously a very, very big development for Cincinnati that he's coming back. But I would expect him to just take a little bit to get going, and then I think he'll look like Joe Burrow. And, look, one thing about Burrow is he's always been at his best when the lights are the brightest. And, he wanted to come back for this game. I personally don't think he looks at the 3-8 record. I'm sure he's ticked off about it, but I don't think that phases him or that affects him up here as far as his mindset coming into this game. It's a rival, right? Lamar Jackson has had the better of him in this rival. I think that frustrates him. This is where, of course, he got hurt with the wrist a couple of years ago was at this very venue at night against Baltimore, and I'm sure he wants to, come back there, and I'm sure obviously he's been back there since, but come back there on a national stage Thanksgiving night and make some plays and ultimately try to pull off a big-time upset for the Cincinnati Bengals. And if you remember what some of those Ravens fans were chanting, after he got hurt, some of the derogatory stuff they were chanting towards Joe Burrow, I'm sure that's something that fueled him throughout his rehab process as well. So I expect him to be locked in. I think it's fair to say that it might take him a drive or two to settle down. He might punt it a few times early. If you don't, by the way, look out. But I think at some point the Bengals offense will get going, and this game has a lot of 28-27, 28-24 kind of feel for me. 27-24, somewhere in that range is kind of the feel for me in this game. And, I'm sure whoever possesses the ball last probably going to win the game. That's kind of how it works in this rivalry. But that's kind of my expectation here. And then you need Jamar to be great. Again, I think he's frustrated by the record. He's a little bit ticked off by it as well. But I think he's like, I got my boy back. I'm back from suspension. Last time I played, it was a team that I hated in the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he didn't got a lot of love for the Baltimore Ravens either. I'm sure he's eager to go out there and to try to make some plays. I think he's got favorable matchups, right? I mean, Wiggins and Cheeto are the corners for Baltimore. They're going to double him a lot. But, they've been putting Kyle Hamilton up near the line of scrimmage a lot and, asking him to blitz and, be a factor there in the run game. So you might not have to worry about him as much on the back end. I think Jamar's going to have some opportunities. I think Joe Burrow's going to do everything in his power to get him the football there as well. And one thing also I'm really looking forward to is the Mike Gesicki Joe Burrow combination, right? I was banging the table. Joe Burrow was banging the table. Got to get Mike Gesicki back. I had been very much with the Cincinnati Bengals like, yeah, this tight end comes in. He's great for a year, and then he kind of moves on. That had been kind of the theme here, of course, for a while. But then they said, we're going to bring Gesicki back. We're going to get him on a contract. Thought that was awesome. Then he gets hurt. Well, Burrow gets hurt. And then Gesicki, of course, gets hurt. We haven't really gotten to see that. If you remember, that tandem was awesome last year. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Gesicki in this game. And Zach Taylor talked about, he's technically a tight end, but that's the spot that he took Jamar's spot last week, basically, and that's apparently why Burton was still inactive. Probably not exactly the case, but that's how Zach Taylor, of course, explained it. So the Gesicki's going to have a lot of opportunities in this game, particularly on third down, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him and Burrow get back to work. We'll see how that chemistry looks, right, if that's something that they're able to pick right back up on or if it's going to take them some time. But Mike Gesicki, kind of a key factor in this game. And then, one thing the Bengals and Zach Taylor have not gotten enough credit for at this point are the developments of the run game. And I think, Chase Brown over the course of the past few weeks has done a really nice job. From a scheme perspective, Zach has done a nice job. And Pitch, of course, there as well. The offensive line steadily improving and blocking a little bit more. So, if you can rely on the run in this game and you don't have to be in a spot where you got to say, you know what, time for us to pass, that's going to make, obviously, a lot of Bengals fans incredibly nervous, probably Zach Taylor as well, if you're putting Joe Burrow in obvious passing situations. If you can continue to improve here with this run game, you're going to be in a good spot. And the Ravens, they're not world beaters against the run, right? There's going to be opportunity for Cincinnati to run the ball. I would like that to be emphasized early from Zach Taylor and Dan Pitcher. And, I think you're really going to see Chase Brown open up a little bit more. That was kind of my thought process coming into the year. When you lost Zach Moss last year and it was basically the Chase Brown show, thought he was tremendous, and I thought this was going to be really, you could kind of call last year his breakout year, but I thought this was going to be the year that he kind of became a household name in the National Football League outside of just here in Cincinnati. And I think losing Joe Burrow really, really hurt him and his development a little bit. But I'm expecting Chase Brown to play his best football here down the stretch, because one very underrated part about Chase Brown's game is how good he is in the screen game. Obviously, he has a couple of drops out of the backfield this year, which is not ideal. But I think with the return of Burrow and Burrow's ability to extend plays, and if guys aren't there down the field, he can slip out of the backfield and catch a pass and go for 7, 8, 9 yards. I think that's going to be huge in this game as well. So I'm looking for Chase Brown to have a big game, looking for Mike Gesicki to have a big game there as well. And obviously we're all interested to see what Yoshi looks like. I think Yoshi has stepped up the past 2 weeks against Pittsburgh and New England. It was a dreadful season for him leading up to those two games, but I've been impressed with what I've seen before. And again, he clearly had a rapport with Joe Burrow. And it's one thing to go out there and try to produce with Jake Browning and even Joe Flacco, but now your guy's back. Joe Burrow's back. Clearly there was a connection there between them on third down and in the red zone. And assuming Jamar's going to get doubled a lot, he's going to have some opportunities in this game there as well. And we'll see if he is able to rise to the occasion for the Cincinnati Bengals. But I don't think it's going to be quite as much of a shootout as we've seen in recent battles between the Bengals and the Ravens. Feel like it's high 20s for both teams. Person or the team that possesses the football last probably going to have an opportunity to go down there and win. Kicking's going to be huge in this game. Always is. Bengals, Ravens. No Justin Tucker anymore, obviously. It's a loop. He's been solid for him. And McPherson having quietly a really good year for Cincinnati, but he hasn't been in a spot necessarily where he's had these huge pressure kicks. Don't be surprised if Evan McPherson finds himself in a spot where he needs to split the uprights late to tie the game or take the lead. And I feel good about that operation, right? I think past couple of years we haven't. As a rookie, it felt like it was automatic for Evan McPherson, and then you had changes with the holder, of course, changes with the long snapper there as well. But I feel good about that operation this year for the Cincinnati Bengals. Kicking game always going to be important. Baltimore, that's kind of an advantage they've always had over Cincinnati in these matchups, and that's allowed them to win some of these games. But I expect that to be a very significant development in the game as well. I would imagine Evan McPherson's going to have some opportunities, especially if the Bengals move the ball a little bit and the Ravens kind of bend but don't break on defense. He's going to have to make some long kicks on Thanksgiving night, and I look forward to that opportunity for him, and I'm ready for him to deliver there as well. All right, Mike Petraglia of CLNS Media going to be joining us any moment now. Looking forward to that. Two other games, of course, on Thanksgiving we'll spend some time talking about. Again, I said this at the top of the show. To me, I think this is probably the best Thanksgiving Day slate that I have experienced in my life, right? Semi recently they're entering the final game, the night game, right? For a long time it was just Lions and then Cowboys. And then usually it was just like, oh, the Cowboys are playing the Commanders, and the Commanders aren't any good, and the Dallas Cowboys are kind of fraudulent. That's not really how it is this year. I mean, that first game, I believe it's at 1 o'clock now and not noon. But that first game between the Green Bay Packers and, of course, the Detroit Lions is a tremendous game. It's a huge game when it comes to playoffs, right? Both these teams very much on the precipice of getting in the playoffs. Obviously, it's a division game. The Bears somehow are winning that division. The Packers really handled the Lions in week 1, but obviously two completely different teams. Here at this point, Detroit is quickly becoming one of the most difficult places to play in the National Football League. And, I expect that place to be rocking there on Thanksgiving. My lean in that game is Green Bay. I've loved up on Green Bay a lot this year. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl. They don't look like a Super Bowl team right now. But with that defense, what Hafley's been able to do defensively, he's done a tremendous job. I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do, calling the shots for them defensively. And we kind of talked about this yesterday, right, with Robert Saleh, how, there isn't this year this top-of-the-line coordinator candidate that could potentially, be the head coach of a team going forward, like this hot name, right? Like a Ben Johnson or a Mike Vrabel last year. There's always seemingly somebody, and I think Robert Saleh has kind of emerged a little bit as that guy. Of course, he was once a head coach already with the New York Jets. But I think Jeff Hafley, what he's been able to do as the defensive coordinator for the Packers, I think he deserves some interviews this year there as well. Jordan Love, is he going to be able to protect the football? Obviously he's kind of a gunslinger, right? He takes a lot of risks down the football field, and we'll see if he's able to protect the football. But I've got a lot of questions with the Detroit Lions, particularly on the back end of their defense, right? It's just like, well, there's something that seems off with the Lions. And you talk about, executing when your window is open in this league. The window was wide open for the Lions last year. 1 seed, right? What have they struggled with? Going on the road in cold weather. Well, the playoffs ran through Detroit last year, and you let a rookie quarterback come in and smack you around a little bit, and you weren't able to capitalize there. So sometimes when you have a golden opportunity like that in this league and you're not able to execute, who knows when that opportunity will arise again. I still got a lot of belief in Dan Campbell. I think he's a little bit reckless, maybe a little bit. You can talk about being aggressive, but sometimes Dan Campbell, in my opinion, is borderline reckless, and that I think has cost them some games a little bit there as well. But it should be a great game. Jahmyr Gibbs kind of bailed out the Lions last week, certainly against the the New York Giants, and we'll see exactly what those matchups look like. Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the best players in this league. I remember, when they took him so early in the draft, it's like, what are you doing taking a running back that early? Well, if he's got that much juice and he's that good out of the backfield and he's got that much speed, it works, right? And especially if you have a quality offensive line there as well. And Detroit, really, ever since Dan Campbell has got there, has had a quality offensive line, and that's really helped them succeed. But when you're a Raider team that has a terrible offensive line and you take a running back that early, you just look like an idiot. And that obviously is what they're kind of experiencing at this point with Ashton Genty. But should be a great game. Looking forward to that. That's the 1 o'clock game, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. Mike Petraglia going to be joining us any minute here on the channel. Looking forward to that conversation. Of course, Cincinnati Bengals, Baltimore Ravens, Thursday Night Football. Going to talk to him about Joe Burrow, his press conference, Jamar Chase, his apology. So that should be coming any minute here. And this is when things get a little bit difficult here when we're doing the show, and it's just me producing. So you got to stand by and you got to do multiple things at once. Check the phone, make sure we're all good. But expect Mike to be joining us any minute now here on the channel, and we certainly look forward to that. There was another game, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Dallas Cowboys. We will talk about that. Also, J.J. McCarthy, we're going to have some of that conversation as well. I think sometimes you just got to rip the Band-Aid off. Sometimes you absolutely got to rip the Band-Aid off and say, you know what, we misfired, and we got to move on, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, another MLB trade, Sonny Gray. He leaves the St. Louis Cardinals. He's going to the Boston Red Sox. I've got some thoughts there on that as well. College football rankings, by the way. New playoff rankings came out last night, and we're not doing our CFP top 10 today. We usually do it every Wednesday here at the show, but we are not doing it today. Why? Well, it's the exact same as it was last week for me. I got no changes there in our top 10, and not many great games last week. Obviously, USC Oregon was a good one, but not very many great ones beyond that last week. So not much of a shakeup there for me. When I look at kind of the scope of where things are at right now, I kind of love when you look at what the bracket projection is at this point. I think it would produce some really outstanding games. It's kind of interesting because, Oregon was in a spot last year where they had the number 1 overall seed, but it's like, congrats, you get to play the winner of 8 and 9. And, they got an Ohio State team, and they just kind of ran into a buzzsaw there. But, I like, assuming Ohio State is going to be able to take care of Michigan, which you probably shouldn't be able to assume that here at this point. They're going to get the winner of the 8-9, right? And that would be Notre Dame and Oklahoma right now. And, boom, that's a challenge right out of the gate for Ohio State, obviously, if that ends up happening. And then, there's some conversation about the group of 5, right? Ultimately, does that team deserve to get in? I like the way it's set up, right? Because I think you want these games to matter for all of these kids, right? And not everybody that's a great college football player has the ability to go to the SEC or to the Big Ten and have an opportunity to play, right? So, I think those kids should have an opportunity to potentially get into the playoff and experience that, right? That's what makes March Madness so bad. Can every team that gets in have an opportunity to win? No. But you see these Cinderella runs all the time, and it's great. That's what makes March Madness so great. And I like the rule that they have in place. Now, one of these years, they're going to have a team that's really good. That is that group of 5 team, and maybe they have a chance. I don't see that this year, right? Like if it's Tulane, are they going to have a chance to win that first game? Probably not. But, ultimately we'll see. I do like that they're kind of given an opportunity. But I understand, right? If you're sitting there like, well, Tulane or a 3-loss Texas team with Arch Manning, that's going to get a lot of eyeballs on them. I hear you. But it'll be interesting to see if they make any adjustments to that going forward. All right, our guest is here. He is waiting in the wings, and he is standing by. He does a great job covering the Cincinnati Bengals, and it is my honor, pleasure, and privilege to welcome in Mike Petraglia of CLNS Media. Mike, I appreciate you making some time. Can you hear me? And I appreciate you stopping by here before Thanksgiving.
I can hear you loud and clear, Stone. Hopefully, I'm coming through likewise.
You are, you are. It's great to have you, and certainly appreciate you stopping by here on the show to talk some Cincinnati Bengals. And there's lots, of course, that we need to discuss here with this team. Got to start with the news of the week, of course. Joe Burrow, you guys talked with him yesterday, and I'm watching that press conference, and in my opinion, I wasn't really surprised by anything. You obviously have a large portion of the Cincinnati Bengals fan base, and even the NFL community there as well, where it's like, the Bengals are 3-8. This guy is injury prone. He gets hurt all the time. Sit him down. That's not Joe Burrow. That's not how he operates, and I kind of expected him to handle some of your guys' questions very similarly to how he did. What were just some of your general takeaways from what he had to say yesterday?
Well, I think that's just it, Stone. Joe Burrow wants to play football. I wrote about that this morning in my column, that if you think Joe Burrow for a second was going to hesitate and worry about his sprained big toe on his left foot, his turf toe injury that required surgery, and not worry about trying to help his team get out of the doldrums, you don't know Joe Burrow. And I think it's really important to understand that every opportunity he has to get on the football field to win a football game in the NFL, he cherishes. And that's, to me, what came through loud and clear on Tuesday afternoon when he met with reporters. This is his team. It's important to really understand that Joe Burrow is not just the quarterback, not just the most important player. He's a captain, and he's seen what's happened with the team. One other big takeaway, I would say, Stone, that really stood out to me was him calling out the players, saying, look, people are going to blame Zach Taylor and have blamed Zach Taylor, and certainly Joe is not what's the word I want to say? Ignorant to that. But he thinks that the players need to take more accountability for having a really crappy year and not playing up to the standard that Burrow himself set after back-to-back AFC North championships in 21 and 22. That was another takeaway. I think another takeaway is that Joe Burrow believes that there's still plenty left to prove in this season. He doesn't think that these are exhibition games. He thinks that, one game at a time, but this team can still show that it's going to be a factor in the AFC North.
Joe, at the beginning of his career, when the Bengals were having a lot of success going to the Super Bowl, like you mentioned, he kind of went out of his way to say, you know what, I love Zach Taylor, and I hope he's the coach here throughout the entirety of my career. And I've kind of always wondered, the past couple of years, it hasn't been, the best. They haven't been winning a ton of games. I've always wondered internally if he still kind of thought that way about Zach Taylor. And as you mentioned, he went out of his way to sit there and basically back the coaching staff. I don't know if he necessarily mentioned Zach directly, but he was like, yeah, we need to go out there and play. There's not a scheme in the NFL that's so revolutionary that's going to bail out players. They got to go out there and execute. How do you think he feels about Zach Taylor? Do you still think he wants him to be the head coach for the remainder of his career?
Deep down, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
He understands there's limitations, and he understands that Zach and the coaching staff probably have also need to have their feet held to the fire a little bit. There are some games where the Bengals had the game won, namely the Jets and Bears back-to-back at home, and they lost that game. And, as much as you can blame the defense for not executing in that game, there were times where the players went into the game and they didn't know where they were supposed to be on the field, namely the defense. That's coaching, Stone. That is not players not playing up to their standard. That's preparation. That's understanding what late game situations are about. And I think Joe Burrow understands that. I think when that comes up, certainly Joe Burrow knows that Zach is going to be evaluated by ownership. And if this team does not respond in the final 6 games the right way, there's a very decent chance that Zach Taylor is not the head coach going forward. I will say this. Duke Tobin is not done. Of all the people I blame in the blame pie, Duke Tobin's about 75%, maybe higher. Because he's the one who constructed this roster. He's the one that thought that you didn't need any help in the safety room in the offseason. He's the one that thought it was a good idea not to add to the defensive edge in the offseason, with Trey Hendrickson's future in question with his contract situation with Shamar Stewart and that contract controversy in the offseason. Unnecessary, but it turned out with the Brown family, the Blackburns, that it turned out to be a big factor going into training camp. So Duke Tobin, especially when it comes to building the defense, did not do a good job and has not had good drafts for probably the last 5 seasons, which is not something you want to see.
I asked Paul Daner this last week, and I'm curious to get your thoughts because I totally agree. Like when you're playing the blame game, I think Duke Tobin's at the top of that list. There's a lot of people, whether it be in the fan base or just out there in general, that seem to think that Zach Taylor's got his fingerprints all over these draft picks, which I'm sure it's a collaborative effort, right? They've talked about that at length, and I'm sure Zach provides feedback, and maybe if there's a player he really wants, maybe they take him. But what do you think that process is like on draft night? Because in my opinion, Duke Tobin's calling the shots, and he's swinging and missing.
Well, I mean, let's be very honest here.
Yeah.
Zach Taylor's fingerprints are on the offensive draft picks.
Yeah.
Jermaine Burton. You want to blame Zach Taylor, and certainly the reaction in the draft room on draft night of Jermaine Burton and, Zach pounding the desk and celebrating that pick. And now Jermaine Burton can't get on the field when Jamar Chase is suspended. Come on. I mean, to me, that's an embarrassment. And what makes that even more complicated, and I know I'm going on a divergent path here, but Zach Taylor, I don't think, if he's not going to play Jermaine Burton, then they ought to cut Jermaine Burton. Right. Well, Mike Brown doesn't want to cut Jermaine Burton because he feels there's an obligation to a draft pick to see him through the very end, and especially when he's a high-round draft pick, like a third-rounder, which is a second-day pick, you stick with the pick until the very, very end. And I don't understand the organizational philosophy there. But going back to the original rant, I do believe that Zach Taylor has his fingerprints on the offensive picks, not on the defensive side of the ball. That's Duke Tobin. That is the scouting director. Certainly, you have to look in that direction. You'd have to look at the college scouting, the pro scouting, and that department has to be overhauled. They have missed on Miles Murphy, although he's been good the last couple of weeks. I'll give him that. But you're talking about the third season for a first-round draft pick for him finally to show some signs of production. That's not good enough. And then Shamar Stewart, I guess you can, I will say he's been injured, but there's a lot on the outside, some, issues that I think needed to be dealt with Shamar Stewart that weren't dealt with in bringing him into the defense, bringing him into the team, and making sure he understood what his role needed to be. He needed to contribute right away. He needed to be ready right away to contribute, and he wasn't.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second because, it was so obvious to all of us that the Bengals at that number 17 pick in the first round, based on how the defense played last year, they needed a guy to come in and play well right away. And he didn't play well in college. The production wasn't there. I understand he was great at the combine, but as a decision maker, how is that even possible to sit there and roll the dice on a guy at such an important pick when he hadn't done anything?
Here's the Bengals' attitude on that, Stone. The Bengals' attitude is draft to the potential, draft to the athleticism. Don't worry about what he did in college if the numbers weren't there. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, you've got to have production. You've got to have demonstrated ability to get to the quarterback on film. There were indications on film that he could beat his guy, but maybe it took too long to beat his guy to get to the quarterback, and that's why he didn't have sacks. He was a good enough run stopper in college. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think when you saw him in preseason games, he demonstrated that. I think when you saw him in training camp, he certainly handled. He had his moments with Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims where he won one-on-one battles, and that was great to see. So there were signs there that he could win at the point of attack. But getting to the quarterback, he just hasn't been able to show it. Now, he hasn't been able to get on the field. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear, and I understand that very well. But even when he's been able to get on the field the few times he hasn't demonstrated that ability consistently enough. And the Bengals were so desperate for him to show something, and it was just a terrible gamble to take when there were other selections there that could have been made. Or one of my big objections with the way the Bengals handle the draft is just sit where you are, take your pick when you want to pick. Well, if you had a chance to get Malachi Starks, okay, and add to the safety room at a position you were desperate to upgrade, why didn't you do that?
Right.
That's what the Baltimore Ravens would have done if they weren't in their position. But they say, okay, well, if Malachi Starks is there, we'll take him. And they have been able to revamp. And also another thing I'll add: the Baltimore Ravens, they started 1-5, worse than the Bengals. They were willing to make a trade at the deadline and bring in a safety, move Kyle Hamilton to the nickel spot, and look at their defense the last 5 games. Mm-hmm. The Bengals, and I wrote about this several weeks ago, but the Bengals organization is so dysfunctional when it comes to aggressively addressing what the problems are, fixing the problems, and letting their fan base know, especially when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow. We're not here to win and worry about our salary cap tranche in 2027. We're here to win in 2025 and do our level best to give Joe Burrow a chance to win, and the Bengals just aren't serious about doing that.
No doubt. Mike Petraglia joining us live here on the show, CLNS Media and the Jungle Roar podcast for a couple of more minutes. One more on Joe before we mention Jamar. There's a lot of questions out there about, what's he going to look like, right? Is he going to look like September Joe? Which I think there's enough data out there that would say that, Joe Burrow the first couple of weeks into a new season isn't the same guy that he is this time of the year.
Right.
What's kind of your expectations for his performance on Thursday night? Do you think we'll see like a September Joe or a Thursday or a Thanksgiving Day Joe, whereas if he plays like that, I think the Bengals got a good chance of potentially winning this game.
Somewhere in between. I mean, the fact that he did get 2 regular season starts under his belt, obviously he got hurt in the second quarter on September 14th, but he mentioned this yesterday that he had a full training camp, he had a full preseason, he got a lot of reps in. I think somewhere in between September and a November Joe is what we're looking at. There's going to be some rust. He is only human, but he has such an ability mentally and I think intellectually to break down a defense, even if it's as good as the Ravens. And he knows the Ravens. He knows how they like to play defense. I think that gives him an advantage. So I think he will be able to certainly make some plays with Jamar Chase in there. Not having T, that does hurt Joe as well as the Bengals offense in general. So he's going to have to adjust for that. The other thing that I think he has that he hasn't had in years past is a solid running game. Chase Brown is starting to look like a top-tier running back in the National Football League. That's going to help Joe Burrow Thanksgiving night. I think it's going to help him a great deal.
Let's talk Jamar. Obviously suspended for the game last week against New England. He issued an apology on social media. I kind of was surprised that he did. I'm sure, maybe his agent or potentially people within the Bengals organization were encouraging him to perhaps do that. Thought the tone in the apology and the tone that he was using with you guys at the press conference maybe was a little bit different yesterday. But
it definitely was different.
What was kind of your reaction to that? Obviously didn't mention Jalen Ramsey by name. Very clear.
No.
He's got no love for him. But just your reaction to the post and I guess how he handled your guys' questions yesterday.
Well, I think you were spot on. The post on IG was thorough. Yeah. It was, I think, genuine. I think it was heartfelt. I think he addressed a number of things in that IG post, namely apologizing to the community, apologizing to the NFL community, to the Bengal fans, to the Cincinnati community. But what I thought was really interesting, he apologized for messing down, or how did he say, messing up on his name?
His name, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was a way of saying, I know there are a lot of fans out there who regard me in very high regard, and my family and friends who look at me as someone very important, and I messed that up. I messed up that name with my dad, Jimmy, and that bothers me. Mm-hmm. I think that really bothered him, that he did that, and certainly it impacted, I think, his family, so he apologized for that. But then on Tuesday, you could tell there was still some bitterness there with regard to what it appears Jalen Ramsey was able to get away with. And I think him saying that every man has his limits on the field and this suspension doesn't change that is a very clear message. Don't be doing that again to me on the field. So that's the way I read it on Tuesday. When you saw him face to face, he was a little more somber, but when you read the IG post, I think he was a little more complete in his total apology. And I think maybe the IG post comes across a little bit more sincere, but I think it was also important for him to face the music in front of the media. And I thought he did what Jamar Chase always does, and that is he spoke from the heart.
No doubt. Last one for you, Trags. Let's talk about Joe Flacco here, because I said this a couple of weeks ago. It felt like the Bengals, what they were stealing from Joe Flacco, the Bengals defense, just wasn't fair. Like, not even just the city of Cincinnati or even the NFL. Like, if they had won some of these games, the Jet game, the Bear game, he's literally like one of the best stories in sports right now, to be able to come over and play immediately, right, against the Packers, new teammates, gut through these injuries there as well. I mean, the AC joint on your throwing shoulder, and then the finger comes out in last week's game. Just unbelievable. But unfortunately, we're going to remember all the losses. And, I know I certainly will remember what he did for this team and this organization. But from a national perspective, probably won't get enough credit for that. What's kind of your take on this Joe Flacco run here over the course of the past few weeks? Because, we bang on Duke Tobin all the time, and rightfully so. But the move to get him was a brilliant one, and it totally worked out.
Great point, Stone. For him to go out and on October 7th swing that deal with the Browns, he had to. Fans wonder, well, why was that so important? Because that locker room was very close to just coming completely apart. And Jake Browning was doing the best he could, but he couldn't drive the ball downfield. And to go out on the field and have no chance to win a football game, like Joe Burrow referenced yesterday, he wouldn't even step on the field if he didn't feel the team had a chance. Well, with Jake Browning, the offense didn't have a chance to win a game. With Joe Flacco, they did have a chance. But then what Joe Flacco did is when he came in and he got banged up, he showed that he still wanted to play. And Zach Taylor has referenced this several times, that Joe Flacco didn't owe the Bengals anything. He could have easily said, you know what, I need to get fully healed before I'm really ready to help you. But Joe Flacco, he knew that Joe Burrow was hurrying himself back, and so he did everything he could to get himself ready to play in every game that he could for the Bengals. And, I thought that Joe Flacco was one of the best stories in terms of a leader that the Bengals could have possibly brought into that locker room. I had a chance to cover him as an opposing quarterback when I covered the Patriots for many, many years back in the 2000s and the 2010s. And the Patriots always respected the toughness Joe Flacco demonstrated on the field and off the field as a leader. And that boy, when I see him come into the Bengals locker room, I saw that firsthand, up close and personal. And that's what will stick with me about is how Joe Flacco really did his best to prepare himself every week. And it was difficult at times because he was still learning that offense on the fly. He was behind an offensive line that was still getting better when he came in. By the time he left, the offensive line was I think, the strong points of the team and one of the strong points of the offense, believe it or not. That will help Joe Burrow, by the way. But Joe Flacco, grace under pressure and pain. That's what I wrote this week for CLNSCincy.com, and that's what I think I will remember about the guy.
Totally agree. No doubt about it. Trags, I appreciate you. Tell us all where we can find your column and tell us a little bit about the Jungle Roar podcast there as well.
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity, Stone. CLNSCincy with a Y.com. You'll find my column up there right now on Joe Burrow and why it's important for him to return on Thanksgiving night. You can follow all of my locker room interviews. That is on my X page at Trags, TRAGS. And of course, the Jungle Roar pod, Bengals post-game pod during the season, and the Jungle Roar pod in general. That's on my YouTube page, youtube.com/Jungle Roar pod.
Awesome stuff. Mike Petraglia joining us here on a Wednesday. Trags, I appreciate the time. I know it's a busy week. Got to get ready, of course, to cover that game on Thursday. I appreciate you. Would love to do it again. And happy Thanksgiving, man.
You as well, Stone. I hope the background lighting from my hotel room here in Baltimore didn't wash out the picture too much.
Oh, no, it looks great. Thanks, man.
All right, bud. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Mike Petraglia joining us here live on the show. We appreciate him. Great stuff there from Trags. He's been covering the Bengals for several years now, does a tremendous job. Make sure you check out his work. Of course, his column, CLNSCincy.com. Bunch of great stuff up there, and check out his podcast there as well. Does that with Richard Skinner, of course, friend of the show. We had him on a couple of weeks ago, so make sure you guys all check that out, and hopefully he can help bring home a Cincinnati Bengals win on Thursday. That certainly would be very exciting if they're able to do that. Appreciate Trags stopping by and making some time here on a busy week. All right, a couple of more topics I do want to get to before we get out of here. We'll go a little bit longer on today's show. Two things. I do want to touch on the Sonny Gray trade and J.J. McCarthy. Could maybe stash these for a different day, but obviously no show tomorrow, so do want to hit both of these before we get out of here. McCarthy, look, in the NFL these days, I think you need to rip the Band-Aid off if it's not working, right? I understand that he's a first-round pick. What was he taking, 11th, 12th overall, somewhere in that range, 10th maybe by the Minnesota Vikings, and you want to give that guy an opportunity. But clearly it is not working. If he was a 4th or 5th round guy, he would not be out on the football field here at this point because he doesn't look like an NFL quarterback out there, and it is very clear. And if you're in a spot where it's like, well, we're going to let him develop a little bit, and there's going to be some growing pains, but he's showing some flashes. He's not showing any flashes, all right? It is very clear to me, and I know I'm being hard on him, but it's very clear to me that he is not a quarterback in the NFL right now, and it kind of reminds me a lot of the situation the San Francisco 49ers found themselves in with Trey Lance, right? Obviously, they were able to pick him high in the draft, but that roster was ready to go right now. It was ready to compete right now for the San Francisco 49ers, and credit to Kyle Shanahan and Lynch and those guys sitting there saying, yeah, we picked this guy in the top 5, but the guy we got last overall is actually better, and he's ready to go right now. We can go play him. Now, unfortunately for Minnesota, there isn't one of those guys on that roster that exists, right? I think a healthy Carson Wentz gives them a better opportunity than J.J. McCarthy, but obviously Wentz is not healthy here at this point. And I just think when you have the team that you have, in Minnesota throughout the course of my life, do they win Super Bowls recently? No, but they know what they're doing, right? It's a well-run, stable organization, top to bottom. They win a bunch of games, and I just feel like a lot of teams around the NFL, they always respect the Minnesota Vikings. Again, are they winning Super Bowls like the Patriots and the Chiefs? No, but they know what they're doing, and they're not, a laughing stock by any stretch of the imagination. And they've got dudes on that roster that are ready to go right now. The term generational talent gets thrown around too much, but I'm going to use it here. You got a top 2 receiver in the National Football League in Justin Jefferson. He's unbelievable. You need to be in the playoffs with that guy. And J.J. McCarthy's holding you back from that, right? You got Jordan Addison there as well, also a really, really good wide receiver. Your defensive coordinator, Brian Flores. Say what you want about him as a head coach, but he is a tremendous defensive coordinator. He's shown that now for several years, and you might not have him next year, right? Maybe he'll get an opportunity to be a head coach again somewhere else, and that will be a huge blow for you. So you're not in a spot as an organization where you can afford to, mess around here and say, well, we're going to keep giving him a chance, and maybe eventually he'll show signs of improvement, right? You're not the Tennessee Titans, right? I'm not quitting on Cam Ward by any stretch of the imagination, but there's no reason for them to blow it up with him now. Like, they're a complete mess. Like, let the kid play and see what you have in him. That's not where you're at with the Minnesota Vikings right now. And unfortunately, there's always these small, or I shouldn't say small decisions, but important decisions that if you miss on, they're going to set you back as a franchise for several years. And I get Sam Darnold had struggled throughout his career as a starter, had been a bit of a journeyman, but he was with the Jets and the Panthers, arguably the two most unstable organizations in the NFL. He goes to Shanahan, is the backup to Purdy, and then boom, he goes to Minnesota and leads them to whatever, 14, 15 wins, an incredible year. And Minnesota said, we're good. We got a rookie here that we took in the first round. We appreciate you, Sam, for what you did for us, but we're ready to head in a different direction. Huge mistake for the Minnesota Vikings. Is Sam Darnold, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, or Lamar Jackson, or Josh Allen, or Justin Herbert? No, but he's a top 12 quarterback playing like better than that right now, and you can win a bunch of games with Sam Darnold. And if you have a guy that is capable of playing at that level, at that position, you don't just let him go. And Minnesota will let him go. And now they're in a spot here with J.J. McCarthy where they're in a really difficult spot. And I think maybe part of the reason that, I've been so hard on McCarthy is because I've been saying this, since he was picked. I was like, he's getting first-round love here out of Michigan. Like, how is that even possible? I understand he won a national title, and I understand he played well in the games against Ohio State. But for the most part, right, he's under center, turning around, handing the football off, right, and playing defense. That's what Harbaugh did those last few years at Michigan when they were winning a bunch of games, and he wasn't asked to do much. And let's be honest here. He was playing Ohio State, and granted, playing well against Ohio State, but the Big Ten when J.J. McCarthy was playing versus the Big Ten right now with Oregon and USC and these new teams, Washington, not the same, right? They had a lot of layups going through that Big Ten schedule, and then granted, they play well against Ohio State and then have an opportunity beyond that. But just him getting picked at that spot, I didn't understand it, and I think it's time to rip the Band-Aid off if you're the Minnesota Vikings. And on top of his bad performance, he's not available, right? And I do think that's something, and I defend Joe Burrow all the time, and I'll continue to do that, but I think durability is something that should probably be considered a little bit more in this league. And again, I know that's kind of going against myself there with how much I defend Joe Burrow, but a guy like Josh Allen, he doesn't miss starts. He goes out there and he plays every single game. Yeah, he's outstanding too, but they can always count on him being available. On top of J.J. McCarthy not being any good, he's not out there either. Like, this is basically his rookie season, right? He didn't play at all, practice at all last year, and then he had, I guess the worst ankle sprain of all time earlier in the year that set him out for several weeks. But let's be clear here, that was a soft benching. And now he's in a situation where it's like, well, all of a sudden he might have a concussion even though he finished out the game. Could this be another soft benching, right, for Kevin O'Connell? So, look, I'm sure McCarthy's a fine kid. I don't know him, obviously, but I think you got to rip the Band-Aid off. And I've said it several times on this show. I'm doing everything in my power to get Mac Jones on this team because Mac Jones – with Kevin O'Connell, would win a heck of a lot of games. Would win a heck of a lot of games for the Minnesota Vikings. Again, they're not in a spot where they need Lamar or Allen or Mahomes or Burrow to be their quarterback. They got pieces all around. They got a good defense, stable organization, great head coach. They just need someone to step in there and deliver the football, and J.J. McCarthy can't do that. It was run first at Michigan. O'Connell wants to be pass first here with the Minnesota Vikings, and McCarthy is not capable of doing that. Again, the Niners, they did a great job saying, you know what, it stinks. We took him really high, Trey Lance, but it ain't working. We got to go with the other guy because he's actually better. Niners, very much a winning organization. They know what they're doing. Minnesota Vikings, I don't view them on the same pedestal as an organization as the Niners, but I also say, you know what, this isn't the Browns here, right? They're not going to sit here, or even like the Cowboys, like Jerry does this all the time where he picks a guy and then he just wants to prove, whether it to be to himself or the world, that, oh, it wasn't a bad pick. We're going to keep sending him out there. Winning organizations don't do that. It ain't working. Rip the Band-Aid off and move off him. Mac Jones is the first name that comes to mind. I mean, like, it's bad with J.J. McCarthy. It is really bad. And when you're that bad at that position, your team looks bad. But that's not the case for Minnesota. They got guys all over the place, and they should be winning a heck of a lot more games than they are. And unfortunately for them, it's been tough sledding with McCarthy there at that quarterback spot. Do you take one in the draft next year? I don't know. I mean, you hear all the time. It's tough, and I love watching college football. But there's these people that don't watch college football, and then going into a year, this quarterback class is going to be great. It's like, no, you have to watch these guys play, right? We were talking about this with Trags. I don't care if you can run really fast and you're really, really strong. I want to see you play good quality football, right? And there haven't been guys at the college level that have really blown you away this year. Obviously, the top two names right now are Mendoza and Ty Simpson. And I think those two guys clearly, as far as guys that are draft eligible, so not including Julian Sayin, are the best two players right now. But are you confident that those guys can play NFL football? I'm definitely not with Mendoza. And, I think Ty Simpson has more NFL traits than Mendoza. But are you over the moon about either one of those guys? No. Right, there's got to be a bridge guy or, a veteran that you can go to. And I think there's several teams out there that should be really considering Mac Jones as a guy that can come in. Now, if I'm the Niners, I don't know if I want him to leave, right? Especially with Purdy getting banged up here and obviously Purdy playing bad last week. Be nice to have him as the backup. But, I mean, if you're the Minnesota Vikings, you've got to have interest in a guy like Mac Jones. And there's several other teams that should be interested as well. There's a reason Mac was taken in the first round. Thought it was a good pick by New England, and played well as a rookie. And then when things crumbled around him, he crumbled along with them. And he's revitalized his career here in San Francisco. It's been awesome to see. And a team like Minnesota should go after him, in my opinion. Rip the Band-Aid off. It's that simple. All right, lastly here, let's talk about this trade. We talked about a trade yesterday. Obviously, Marcus Simeon, Brandon Nimmo, those two guys, they get swapped. And that's a pretty significant trade, right, in Major League Baseball, and kind of rare that you see, just a one-for-one swap, right? Veteran guys, the Mets, they upgrade with defense. Obviously, Simeon, Gold Glover, two-timer in his career. Bat's been a bit of a struggle, World Series champion, got a lot of experience. I think that fits great. And now all of a sudden you got him and Lindor up the middle. If you can add somebody that can play defense in your outfield, I think that helps you improve. And also from a Rangers perspective, you're banking on Nimmo kind of getting back to where he was a couple of years ago, helping you out offensively. His defense has declined a little bit, but I think Nimmo goes to Texas with the expectation that he could still compete for a world title. And I kind of feel similar with this move between the Cardinals and the Red Sox, where it's like, I don't think there's a clear winner here. I think they both got better, to be completely honest with you. Both teams obviously in completely different spots right now. The St. Louis Cardinals and the Boston Red Sox. Red Sox got to the playoffs, and they showed some good sign. It was a good fight down the stretch, but they didn't have enough horses from a pitching perspective to go on a run there. And Crochet is an ace, one of the best arms in the league, but behind him, what did they have? Not really much. And Sonny Gray's a guy that, I've always liked Sonny Gray. I think people in this town have always liked Sonny Gray. Was a great pitcher as a Cincinnati Red, and then, there was some, I don't know if he exactly wanted to be here, and he kind of made that known a little bit, and it didn't end the best way, but he had some great moments with the Cincinnati Reds. I always respect Sonny Gray and what he did for this town. It's kind of bounced around a lot. He's making a ton of money, and has been solid in St. Louis over the past few years. We'll say this most recent season is worse since like 2018, so there's some concern there if you're the Boston Red Sox, but you needed a guy behind Crochet. Now, can Sonny be your 2? I don't know. He definitely can be a 3. In their rotation here at this point. I would definitely have some concern. The Cardinals are going to pay half of his contract, so I think the Red Sox are going to have to pay about $20 million. And I would always have a concern with a guy that you're paying that much money that literally can't throw the fastball. Like, if he throws the fastball, it's getting smacked over the fence, but the off-speed stuff's great. Sweeper's great. That curveball, if you remember that here in Cincinnati, that's still got a lot of action on it. That's really, really good. And it was a move that, the Red Sox needed to go out there and get an arm. And I think they're in a better spot to do it via trade than trying to land one of these free agents, right? Because Dylan Cease, of course, is going to be a very highly coveted arm there as well. Framber Valdez, of course, going to be another one as well. And I don't know if you want to kind of get into that bidding war for some of those guys. Think you're best suited to kind of trade and, save some cash and still perhaps go out there and get another free agent there as well. So the Red Sox, they get what they need, a veteran guy that has pitched in big moments that can be reliable and trustworthy and can be inserted into their rotation and make them take a step in the right direction as far as, being a true contender. And I think the Cardinals, they're in a good spot there as well. Look, they're in rebuild mode, which is crazy. I understand, past couple of years, they haven't looked like the true St. Louis Cardinals. Still have had quite a bit of success against the Cincinnati Reds. But, I mean, for most of my life until recently, it's like the Cardinals are always good, and they're always, going to win a ton of games and beat up on the division and be in a chance where they could, potentially win a world title. Not there anymore. So that's some opportunity for Cincinnati, because Cincinnati should be in a spot where, okay, we're trying to get better. We just made the playoffs. Let's make a few more moves and ultimately, take that next step, potentially win a playoff game, win a playoff series, and, kind of go from there. Cardinals kind of going in the opposite direction. They're retooling here. And they get two arms, lefty Brandon Clark, righty Richard Fitz. I think Fitz is a guy that can come in and immediately be in their rotation. Got a lot of upside. We'll see, how he looks. And then Clark, probably more of a reliever here at this point. Project. I don't know if they can expect much from him this year, but I think it works for both ways, right? I mean, for the Cardinals, when you have a guy like Sonny Gray on that expensive of a contract and you're not a postseason team here at this point, it doesn't really make any sense for you to hold on to him. And, I think they understood that, and they're like, yeah, we'll still pay half his salary, but if we can get the other half off and then get some young guys in return, that's going to be a good situation for us as an organization. So, fine with the move. Again, when I look at the Mets move with the Rangers, I'm like, yeah, kind of works for both teams, right? I think they got better and they got better. Kind of how I feel here for the Cardinals and the Red Sox. My biggest takeaway is just that, wow, I mean, the Cardinals are retooling, and it's just hard for me to imagine that, because I think about, all those guys that they had and, winning world titles and the Pujols and Yachty and all these guys. And obviously we're several years removed from that here at this point, but I've always, looked at them as like a top-of-the-line franchise and organization, and they're kind of reworking some things a little bit here, but they get some two young arms here, and we'll see. Ultimately, if those guys end up being studs, it's like, wow, it's a no-brainer. The Cardinals smoked them here in this trade, but the Red Sox needed to do something to add to that rotation, because it's like Crochet, awesome, but beyond that, nothing really, and they needed to make a move, and we'll see. We'll see how Sonny does. I mean, if he performs like he did this past year, I don't know if that's necessarily the greatest thing in the world for the Boston Red Sox, but I would anticipate him bouncing back a little bit. What is he, 37, somewhere in that 35, 37, somewhere in that range. So he still has a few more solid years in front of him. Again, the off-speed stuff is still tremendous, so we'll see how that works out. But another big-time trade in Major League Baseball. All right. Appreciate everybody, as always, for hanging out with us here on Thanksgiving Eve. Our Bengals preview against the Ravens. That was, earlier, first segment in the show, so obviously you can check that out on YouTube. But that clip will go out later on. I don't know if we'll wait till the morning to put that out or maybe put that out tonight. We'll see. Interview with Trags. That'll be up as soon as possible. Great stuff from Trags. We've had some solid guests here on the show of late. We certainly appreciate that. He's making some time. Busy week for him, covering the game against Baltimore. Obviously, Thanksgiving week, he made some time for us here on a Wednesday. We greatly appreciate him. Check out his column. It's great. clnscincy.com. Jungle Roar Pod there as well with Skinny. Great stuff there. Don't want to miss out on that. So we're very fortunate here in this town. We got some great people that cover the Cincinnati Bengals, and several of which have made some time to stop by and join us on our show, and that obviously means a lot. We appreciate Trags. Check out that interview on YouTube later today. Also available in podcast form there as well. No show tomorrow. We will be live on the channel for the Bengals game. Craig Salen's got you covered throughout the duration of the game. I will join him for the post-game show late night Thanksgiving, hopefully talking about a Cincinnati Bengals win. So check that out. As always, subscribe, like the stream, and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast there as well. We certainly appreciate it. Give us 5 stars. That helps out a lot there as well. But a great week to this point so far. Appreciate everyone as always. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you late night tomorrow after Bengals and Ravens.